Going to record. Gotten into that habit. Great. So we're talking about objections today. So this call kind of goes in conjunction with the call about enrollments, the enrollment conversation. Here's kind of the rule of thumb before we get into the art and science of objections is. It should be obvious, but I'm just going to say it just to put it out there, which is you should never try to sell someone something that they don't need. So if you're in an enrollment conversation and someone says no, the strategies that I'm going to share with you today very easily could be used to kind of manipulate people in a way to get people who are probably a no and turn them into a yes. When in reality they really should be a no. So I'm just saying that because it's up to your guys' discernment to realize there are some people who object to you and they say no, and that's really a good thing, and they really shouldn't be a part of whatever it is that you're doing. And then there is the people who really should be a part of what you're doing, but they're scared. And so they object. Those are the people that we're going to focus on today. That's what this is about. Because even if you're talking to an ideal client and they're a perfect fit, they check all the boxes, essentially what you're asking them to do most likely is scary for them in some way. And so most people, I'd write this down if I were you, most people do not have a habit of making big, bold decisions. Most people do not have a habit of making big, bold decisions, especially that is in relation to themselves. So, Lauren, for example, most people don't have a habit of starting their own business, right? Or investing into something that can be like a side business for them. That's not something they're used to. Most people's biggest decision and investment is like their house, and that's not really them. It's kind of like just a thing, or their car. Like a lot of people's biggest purchase is their car, which that's cool too, but it's not really them. It's not like investing in yourself through personal development or starting your own business. That's really about you. And so the challenge with that is that we have our own fears and our own insecurities that come up when it comes to doing things with ourselves for ourselves. Like we're happy to donate money to charity, but a lot of people wouldn't even spend that same money on themselves. And so, does this make sense so far? Okay, cool. So just because someone says no or objects to you doesn't mean no. So this is under the context of someone's objecting to you, but what they're really saying is yes, but I'm scared. Okay? That's the context for this whole conversation. We're not trying to convince people that are no's to try to turn them into yeses. That's not what this is about. This is about people that are yeses. They really are truly yeses, but they're scared, so they say something other than yes. They say I'm afraid, and they use some objection to portray that. So we're going to talk about the 4 or 5 biggest objections that you will most likely hear. The first one, my favorite, is let me think about it. How many of you heard this one before? Let me think about it. Yeah, we've all heard that one before. And here's the thing. Remember, this is the part that you have to keep in mind. This person wants to say yes to you. They want to say yes to themselves. So is it thumb up or thumb down? Is it a good idea to help them get to the moment of decision and then to feel them start to back off and then to let them go? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. Here's the thing. In this context, you must stand up for people more than they're willing to stand up for themselves in this moment. Because in this moment, the small side of themselves is facing death. I know that sounds kind of drastic, but it's true, right? Like if you're just kind of Joe Schmo and you have a 9 to 5 and then you meet Lauren and she's like, hey, I can turn you on to this opportunity. And they're like, oh my God, that could change my life. The small side of them is like, no, dude, like that's not safe. That's like, we're safe in this little box. If you go outside of that box, we don't know what's going to happen. So the little self tries to bring you down. And that's true for personal development. It's like when you want to grow as a person, the small version of you is like, no, like just stay in here. And it makes a last ditch effort to try to keep you safe. And it sounds very logical, the excuses that we make. I don't have the time. I got to think about it. You don't have to think about anything. We're pretty smart people when it comes down to it. Like we don't really need to think about all that much. So the one thing that you have to know is no matter what objection we go over, whether it's let me think about it, or I don't have enough money, or I got to talk to Jehovah about it, or whatever, it all means the same thing. It all means I don't trust myself. I need your help to help me make this decision. Do you get that? I'm just reading Lauren's comment.
I can say it out loud.
Say it out loud.
Yeah, well, I feel like I get a lot lately that, I mean, because for everybody, I'm pretty sure everyone knows a bit, but I'm in network marketing with Isagenix, health and wellness company. I'm super passionate about the income side of things. And I get so many people who in these conversations, they're like, or we'll be talking. I'm like, oh, interesting that that's what you're pursuing. Like, that's exactly what I do. Like, we'll chat about it a little bit. They'll be very excited to talk about things more. We'll have an amazing conversation, and even being like, yeah, this sounds awesome. Like, I definitely want to do something like this. Like, what you have is like what I'm going for. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about like doing it then. And then it just keeps like dragging on, or it's like, okay, oh great, yeah, send me that, awesome, okay, wait, how would I get started? Here's how. And then I'm like, so did you look at that stuff? Like, I feel like I'm in that place a lot, and where I probably just need to get a little bit more assertive.
Yep.
In those conversations, because I feel like I'm in that, like, there's so much excitement, and like it's like exactly a fit, or could be, and then it's like
Okay, so pop quiz. 2 things, Lauren. This is
Yeah.
for you specifically. Pop quiz. Last week, there are 2 words above the enrollment conversation. What are they?
Oh, I'm failing my pop quiz right now.
Who can bail her out? Who's a good teammate who can bail her out?
Benevolent leader.
Benevolent leader. Chelsea for the win. Benevolent leader. You remember that, Lauren?
Mm-hmm.
That's you in this conversation.
Okay.
So they might get weird on you, and that's your moment. It's like herding cats. Like you have to focus them in, because left to their own devices, they'll get to that point of decision and then freak out and then just run for the hills.
Right.
And it seems very logical. They're like, oh no, of course, like send me the link. Like, no, but like send me the link though. But like, we're all good. Send me the link.
Yeah.
And then they fucking freak out. So you have to take control. You must be, because here's the thing. If you send them the link and then they fucking freak out and then they never do anything, that's a disservice to them. Mm-hmm. Assuming that they are really, truly a yes. Because what they're really saying is like, Lauren, I'm fucking really scared. I don't trust myself, but I really, really want to do this. Help me. Mm-hmm. Help me. And by indulging their smallness and giving them the link, that's basically like saying, oh no, it's okay. Like you can do it on your own. Like, even though you can't. So here you go. And then you wonder why you never hear from them ever again. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool.
And I think too, and sometimes in those kinds of conversations, especially if it's somebody that I know, I'm like, well, okay, hold on. Do you trust me? Like, getting on that level, or like, what's actually your hesitation or your fear right now? Like, just like get into it,
Yeah, for sure. And that's entirely the point. So as we go through this, I think it'll help. You'll see kind of some strategy for that. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, mute. Great. So the first one is, let me think about it. It doesn't matter what, remember, it doesn't matter what anyone says. They're lying to you. They're not purposely lying to you, but unfortunately, we don't live in a day and age where we're so like conscious that we can just like explicitly be like, you know, Deanna, here's the deal. Like, I really just don't trust myself right now, and I'm really scared, and I want you to help me. Like that, like, wouldn't it be so cool if all of our people said that to us and we were like, okay, I'm going to help you do this. Yeah. And then like, it all just worked out. Like, I hope we get there someday. Like if I have anything to do with it, hopefully we'll create a society that lives that way. But right now we lie, right? You could have like the worst day of your life and you see someone walking down the street and they're like, oh, Shannon, how are you? And you're like, oh, I'm doing great. Yeah, I'm having an awesome day. Like, we all lie. Like, you fucking come home from work or whatever, and you're having a rough day, and your phone rings, and you're like, hello, right? Like, we do that. We lie. It's just how we are as a culture. And so when it comes to making especially big decisions about ourselves, if we don't trust ourselves and if we don't think we're worthy, that's when it gets tough, right? So they need you. Like, I can't stress to you guys enough how much they need you in that moment. And for you to indulge their smallness is the worst thing that you could do. I said this on the call last week, and I'll say it again. The absolute worst thing in life is when an ideal client and an ideal like person are having a conversation together and they don't somehow work together. That is the worst thing in life ever. And so being able to field these objections powerfully makes all the difference. I can't tell you guys how many clients I currently have or that I've had over the years that initially objected to me. And if I had indulged their smallness, I would not have worked with them in the past, or I would not be working with them now. I guarantee it. Interestingly enough, some of the people who have objected to me the most became the greatest clients of mine, because that's like where we forged the relationship of trust and of me being this benevolent, powerful person that can navigate you through this challenging moment. Isn't that what so much of this is? Like, Lauren, these people are going to sign up with you. They're going to hit moments where it's going to get fucking hard. And you're going to be there to be like, no, stay the course. Like, we're going towards the light at the end of the tunnel. And then they get there and they're like, thank God, this is amazing, right? Or like in any of our work, there's going to be moments where it's challenging, and you have to be there with them as the rock to move them through that. So if you can't do that at this moment, then you'll never get the opportunity to do it down the line. So the objection is actually like the first really awesome coaching moment for you and them, if that makes sense. And so whether they say, let me think about it, whether they say, I don't have the money, whether they say, I need to talk to somebody, whether they say whatever, it all means the same thing. So you do not address the objection based on what they say, because what they're saying isn't really what they mean. Do you get that? You have to be like the parent in a way. It's like when you were a kid and your parents were like, Shannon, it's time to brush your teeth. And you're like, I'm not brushing my teeth tonight. And they give you this like, and there's this tone, right? There's this tone of like, let me tell you how it's going to go, right? It's like they see through the little act and they are the one who knows what's what. And you listen to them. There's a reason for that. So the way that I start every single objection, no matter what it is this. I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, and let me say this. I hear what you're saying, and let me say this. Now, you say it like that for a very specific reason, because you never say, I understand, because I understand validates the behavior. You don't want to validate the behavior. We are not like, because the behavior is their small self coming out. I don't want to validate your small self coming out. I want to like destroy that part of you. And so I say, I hear what you're saying. And I really drop into the empathy. Here's like, this is if you guys get nothing else out of today's talk, this is what I want you to understand. Think of this like a table. This is the table of negotiation. And they're sitting on this side and you're sitting on this side. But the way that it should feel is like you're both on the same side. When people object to you, this is what they're ready for. They're like, yeah, let me think about it. Now we're in a fight. Because you can't, if you try to fight against someone who says, let me think about it, what happens when you try to like overpower someone who's like already made a decision to think about it? Like, they're only going to justify the think about it even more, even though there's nothing to justify because they're kind of just making it up. That's weird. So do not go into a fight with them, right? Like, oh, well, you know, I have to think about it. Well, what do you have to think about? Well, now they feel like they have to do this and try to like defend themselves. I hear people do that all the time in the service-based world. Well, I have to think about it. Great. What do you have to think about? They don't know what they have to think about. They just made it up. They're like full of shit. They don't know. So now they have to dig themselves even deeper. They're like, oh, well, what I have to think about is, and they're like having to defend themselves against you when you should be on their team. So how many of you guys have ever seen like judo or aikido before? You ever seen that martial art? Judo, aikido, anything like that? Lauren, Chelsea, no? Okay, so basically like you have, Deanna knows what's happening. I know you know. In like you have karate, right? Or you have boxing where like you punch each other. But in judo, it's more like circular, right? It's like someone attacks you and then you just kind of like get out of the way and kind of use their own energy, right? This is the exact same thing. You want them to feel like you're on their side. So saying things like, well, what do you have to think about? Like that's confrontational language. The whole vibe is just cool, calm, collected, cool as a freaking cucumber. And when they object to you, it's almost like you're coming around, you're like sliding around to their side of the table and you're saying like, hey man, I see that you're scared. And like, it's okay. I'm here with you. And we're going to work through this. Like it's benevolent in that way. It's not confrontational. So if you guys get nothing else other than that mindset shift, because when people are ready to fight, they're only going to entrench themselves deeper into the bullshit that they just said to you, rather than like sliding over to their side of the table and being like, hey, I hear you. I'm here with you. I see that you're scared and I'm not going anywhere. We're solid. That totally changes how they feel about it. Because they object to you and then they're ready to do this. And then you slide over to their side and you're like, hey man, what's happening? And then they're like, and they can just be open and vulnerable and they don't have to feel like they have their hands up.
Do you think that it's confrontational too? Because I tend to be like, oh yeah, for sure. Like, like let's check in a couple days or next week or something. But I will ask like, is there something in particular you're kind of thinking through or wanting to dig into deeper that I can point you? No, don't go there. Let them think.
They're not. There's nothing. Like if you, and especially because
it's the feeling a lot of the time,
My guess is in that conversation, you've probably done a pretty good job of outlining like what it's about, how it like all the stuff, like, especially in my world, there's really not a lot to think about. It's like, it's 12 months. We meet once a week. It's X amount of money. Like what's to not get about that? Like, it's pretty straightforward and it's either for you or it's not. Like, you know what I mean? Like a network marketing opportunity is like, here's what it's about. Here's how we do it. Here's what the investment is like. And for the, like, and I know plenty of people in that space that like, when they see a good thing, they jump on it as long as it makes sense. Like, and the sense is like 3 to 4 bullet points. Like, yep, this is the entry fee, da, 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 da. And they're like, oh yeah, of course, makes sense. And they do it. So no one really ever needs to think about it. That's just their small sense that is just their small self throwing out the most logical and socially acceptable objection. If you go to Best Buy and you're looking at the TVs and you're like kind of interested, and the sales guy like slides over to you and he's like, hey, let me show you the TVs. You're like, oh, we're just thinking about it. You're not really just thinking about it. You really are interested, but you don't want to be like sold, like. So let me think about it as like such a socially acceptable kind of thing to throw out there that very often people use it as a way to get off the hook really easily. But that's not us. We don't let people get off the hook easily. That's not our job, because if we let people off the hook easily, then we let them down, because what they're really saying is, I need your help. I'm scared. That's the bottom line. At Best Buy, it might be, it's a different story, right? You're not secretly saying like, I need your help picking out a TV, but I'm just scared to ask you. Like, no. In this world, it's different, right? So just to have that context alone of first and foremost, it's not a fight. It's not whoever can outwit the other one. Like, well, what questions do you have? Because I can answer all the questions. Like, nope, it's not about that. It's not about that back and forth. It's about getting on the same side. It's almost like metaphorically, you put your arm around them and you're like, hey man, I feel that you're scared, and let's do this together. Totally changes the vibration of the conversation. It's not a fight anymore. And they don't feel like they have to defend themselves. They can be seen in that moment as vulnerable. And you can look at them and be like, hey man, I know you're scared. And they can feel okay being seen as scared. That's huge. How many people like on a normal basis feel okay being small, like being seen as small? Not many people. So to do that in that moment for them is like super powerful. So there's that. So I say, I hear what you're saying, and let me say this. So the first part is, I hear what you're saying. That's the empathy side. That's basically metaphorically like, I hear that you're scared. I feel that you're scared. That's empathy, total empathy. And let me say this is kind of like the parent that looks at the kid like, I'm not brushing my teeth tonight. And the parent's like, let me say this. Like, let me tell you how it's going to go. Okay? It's this tone of like, here's the best possible way forward here. Like, I totally hear that you could drive your car off a cliff. Like, I hear that. And here's what we're going to do instead. Like, we're going to just go around the corner. Okay? Like, that's what we're going to do. So I say, I hear what you're saying. And let me say this. And then I simply go back in the conversation, because here's the funny part. Remember, I happen to have my notes from last week right here. Remember, in the beginning, we go over the pain, right? And we talk about what is it costing them to be where they are. Do you remember that? And for most people, whether it's like changing their life or starting a business, wouldn't you say it's costing them a fair amount not to do that? And wouldn't you say it's worth a fair amount for them to do that? Like, totally. And so this is not about you outsmarting them. It's not about you overpowering them. It's about you being a mirror for them. So I say, hey, I hear what you're saying. Empathy. I'm connecting with you. I feel you. Hey. I hear what you're saying. And let me say this. And then I go back in the conversation and just point to what they said. I don't come up with anything smart. I don't try to overpower them. I just say, and based on what you told me about what it's costing you to be where you are, it sounds to me like moving forward and making a decision is what's going to serve you most right now. Wouldn't you agree? This is what I call the come to Jesus moment. Because they have this objection that they're trying to defend, and then you just completely melt that. So the objection goes away and they don't need to defend themselves. Now they're just open, and then you just hit them with the truth. You don't try to convince them. You don't try to strong arm them. You don't manipulate them. You just hold up a mirror and you say, hey, you told me that this is what it's costing you to be where you are. So based on that, it seems to me like the best thing that you can do right now is to make a decision and move forward. Wouldn't you agree? And I say that, and I say, wouldn't you agree? Because I want them on board. I want it to be a conversation. I don't want to just say, the best thing for you to do is just to do it. Okay? So just do it. Just do it. Don't be a chump. You can say don't be a chump sometimes if you want to. So that's the come to Jesus moment, because they don't feel like they need to defend themselves. They see that you see them and really connect with them at a deep level. So they have this moment where they're like, you know what? You're right. You're right. Let's do this. Now, a variation of that, because here's the thing. When you get people to talk about their pain, it's very emotional. But when people are at the moment of decision, they get into their mind, because their mind is good at coming up with like excuses and validation and things like that. So the whole point is their objections come from here, and we want to migrate them back into here. Okay? That's why we say, hey, based on what you told me it's costing you, that reminds them to get back into here, because what it's costing them has more to do with this than it does with this. Does that make sense? And we don't make decisions from here. We make decisions from here. So of course they're not going to make a decision from here, so we need to migrate them back into here. Does that make sense? Cool. Sometimes I'll say something to the effect of, hey, I hear what you're saying, and let me say this. Based on what you told me about what it's costing you to be where you are, it sounds to me like it's going to cost you a lot more to think about it than it is to make a decision. Wouldn't you agree? Again, I don't want to impose that on them. If they disagree, I want to hear about that. But it's kind of like, based on what they've told me, obviously it's true. So I'm just being a mirror for them in that moment. I might say something like, I might say something like, I hear what you're saying, and let me say this. Do you have a habit of getting to the point of decision and not making one? And that's a come to Jesus moment, big time, because they know that you kind of know that they have that habit at that point. So they have this, they can do one of two things. They can lie and be like, no, I've never said that before. And you can be like, okay, bullshit. Or they'll just look at you and be like, again, come to Jesus. They just drop all their defenses and go, you know what? You're right. I do. I have a habit of chickening out on myself. And you can go, yeah. So do you want to continue to indulge in the behavior that's kept you stuck? Or do you want to make a decision and change everything? Do you see how in that moment I'm being firm with them? It's a little bit of tough love. Do you guys get that? It's a little bit of tough love. That's where the benevolent leader is. If you're just all benevolent, then it's just kind of like all love and you might let people go. But a leader leads people, don't they? A leader leads people towards something. Well, what are we leading people towards? A better version of themselves in their life or in their business or family, or some version of life at large. We are leading them to a better version of themselves in some way. So we have to be a good leader. To be a good leader, you must ensure that people get to the destination. It's like, yeah, I'm a pretty good pilot. I get my passengers there 50% of the time. That's pretty good, right? 50-50. Hey, I don't know. Let's see. Right? Like in the airline world, that wouldn't fly. Like if you were like, yeah, I just got out of flight school. I'm about 50-50. You want to hire me as your private pilot? They'd be like, no thanks. I like the guy with 100%. So what's cool about this is if you have this conversation in this way, you can take all the people that are the let me think about it and the I can't afford it and the what and the not right now or the I got to talk to Bob Dylan about it. and you can turn those people into yeses. And that's being a good leader. That's being a good leader, because you're not indulging their smallness and you're not letting them continue the behavior that's kept them stuck. You're standing up for them. You're being more for them in that moment than anyone else ever has. That's powerful. And I shit you not, I swear to you, they will thank you for it later. They may hate you for it in the moment, but they will thank you. The very next day, when they wake up and they realize they have made that decision and they are in it, they're going to be like, Chelsea, Lauren, Deanna, Marion, Charlotte, Ron, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so glad I made that decision. I was scared out of my wits, but I did it. Let's go. How beautiful is that? That's like the best thing in the world, but you must stand up for them. And it's scary, right? Because we don't want to like be pushy and we don't want to be salesy. And I don't recommend that you be any of those things, but I do recommend that you're strong, because a good leader is strong. A good leader is like, hey, we're going in the darkness. I don't know what's on the other side, but we're going. Follow me. And it's like, okay, right? When they are scared, if you're solid, they will trust you. But you must maintain that frame. You must hold that state. And really, it's just a confidence. What is it confidence in? It's confidence in yourself. How many of you are confident that if people partner with you in whatever way that you operate in the world, that it's a good thing? How many of you are confident in that? Yeah, all of you. Thank you. So you can be confident that, hey, if this is an ideal client and I'm good at what I do, if we partner, we're going to make awesome stuff happen. Like, that's a pretty safe bet. That's why every time if someone objects to me, I have total certainty, total confidence in my voice, because it's like, how can 2 + 2 not equal 4? Like there's no way that it can't. So even if they're a little bit uncertain, they can borrow my certainty. They can borrow my strength in that moment. And so really what you're doing is you're just holding a mirror up for them, and then you are giving them the opportunity to choose a new reality for themselves. Because if I say, hey man, it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like you have this habit of getting to the point of decision and not making one. And they go, yeah, you're right. And I'm like, okay, well, you have 2 choices from here. You can continue to do that and pay the cost that comes along with it, or you can make a decision and change everything. It's really up to you. And that's when, again, it's not me telling them anything. I'm not forcing them. I'm not manipulating them. I'm putting them back at choice, but I'm just giving them more perspective about their choice. Because sometimes we forget, when we get into the moment and the small self really gets scared and it starts coming up with bullshit excuses of why you shouldn't do something, we forget that the actual ranch that we're retreating back to is fucking burning down. So we forget that we're actually going back to a reality that's costing us a hell of a lot to be in. And we didn't make it up. Remember, the cost is the highest part of the equation. That's not projected onto them. They filled that in. So if anything, if I'm a little pushy, it's because I'm saving you from the drastic cost of the world that you live in. Like, sorry, I'm sorry, not sorry. Like, I'm not gonna, my heart is too big to allow people to live in hell. So if I can do something to get people out of that hell and get them into a world that they absolutely love, then of course I'm going to do it. Of course I'm going to do it. And so that's that. The next one is, I don't have the money. How many of us have ever heard that one before? I don't have the money. Here's the funny thing about that. If I said, Chelsea, I have a $10 million winning lottery ticket. I just won it yesterday. The same day I just decided that I'm going to give everything away and go live in some remote cave somewhere for the rest of my life. So I don't even care about money. I would love to just give you that ticket, but I have to get some kind of money for it. If you give me $1 million, we'll just call it even. You can have a $10 million winning lottery ticket for $1 million. Would you do that deal? Yes or no? Who would do that deal? Yes or no? Okay, I'm guessing that all of you don't have $1 million in your back pocket, or, like that's close by. But my guess is that if I was legitimately going to give you a $10 million winning lottery ticket, no strings attached, for $1 million, that you would figure it out. Is that, Lauren's nodding her head. We're all in agreement. You know, but we like, okay, that's a little bit of like a drastic, you know, scenario, but we've all been like, we've had emergencies that come up that we didn't know how we were going to pay for, something like car breaks down, or you get hurt, or you're traveling and it costs more than you thought, or whatever. Like, we've all had to find money in ways that were beyond what we currently thought was possible. Is that fair? Have we all been in some version of that? Of course, because how much money you have is irrelevant compared to how resourceful you are. Write that down. How much money you have is irrelevant to how resourceful you are. Because if it was 10 million bucks on the line and all I needed was $1 million to figure it out, you can please believe I would figure it out. Like, I don't know what I would do, but I'd start making phone calls, right? Like, you would just start doing something. I have yet to meet one person that's like, I don't know, 10 million bucks. Like, I'd pass. Like, I just wouldn't figure it out. Like, it's not worth it. It's not worth the energy or the time for me to figure it out. Like, no one has ever said that to me. So what does that tell us? It tells us that when someone says, I don't have the money, that they're lying. They're lying. Because if they really, really wanted the 10 million winning dollar lottery ticket, they would get it. They would find a way. We've all been in situations where we had to find a way. We didn't have the money, we didn't have the time, we didn't have the resources, and somehow we made it happen. How many of us have had a moment where we had to make it happen and we did? All of us. That's called life. That's what we do. That's what human beings do. We just do shit. We make magic. And so I don't have the money is never true. And yet most people are like, oh, well, like, tell me about the money. Like, they start making the objection about the money. It's not about the money. It's not about the money. It's about, what are they saying? What are they really saying? I'm scared. I need your help. Because if they really wanted to do it and they really trusted themselves and they really, it's so funny, right? Because here's where it gets weird. I say to people, I'll give you $10 million if you give me one. I've never met a person who won't take that deal. Never. But you know what deal most people don't take me up on? Is this deal. I will give you $10 million worth of transformation in your life for $1 million. Who would do that? Who would do that deal? Hardly anyone. Hardly anyone. Because they're like, oh, come on, man. Like, $1 million for like personal development, like, I don't know. Right? But for 10 million bucks, they'll do that deal all day long. But ultimately in our lives, if we're really, really honest, what's more valuable, 10 million bucks or like the most expanded, awesome version of ourselves? Probably number 2, right? So it's funny how we value things in life. We put things that almost have less value than us ahead of us, even though we are more valuable. Every single person would take that $10 million deal any day of the week, but practically no one would take the $1 million self-improvement deal. Interesting. That's the caveat. That's why people can look at your opportunity, Lauren, and be like, wow, it makes so much sense. But because in a way they're investing in themselves, really, if it was just like a flat, tangible thing and they didn't have to do anything at all, if it was just purely an investment, the MLM game would be totally different because there's nothing for them to do. They don't have to show up. They don't have to trust themselves. They don't have to reconcile their insecurities or any of that. They don't have to put in the work, right? It's like, hey, just put 10 grand into Bitcoin and I promise you in 5 years, we'll all be happy, right? Like, there's plenty of people that did that deal and that are happy, but because it includes them, that's where it gets weird. And what they're really saying is, I don't trust myself. I need help. So I address it the same way. I say, hey, I hear what you're saying. And let me say this. It sounds to me like what you really can't afford is to continue to pay the extreme cost of being where you are. Those aren't my words, that's their words. What is it costing you to be where you are? This much. Well, that's a whole heck of a lot more than I'm asking you to invest right now. Now, of course, I don't say that to them like that, but that's what's true, right? That's what's true. So I'm just holding up the truth mirror. I'm just saying, hey, man, that it's funny that you say you can't afford it because you're currently affording way more than that. You're paying the immense cost of that right now. I in my world, for example, people say, you know, Shannon, I'm making 10K a month right now and I want to make 50. And I'll go, cool. So that's a 40K per month difference. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, cool. So currently you're investing 40K a month in playing small. And they're like, wait, what? And I'm like, well, yeah, because were you to have all the things that you are not currently living up to, then that's where you'd be, right? Like, that's why you're hiring me to help you get there. And they're like, well, yeah. And I'm like, okay, so it's costing you 40K a month to be where you are. And the investment to work with me is X amount, which is typically on the front end lower than that, significantly lower than that. Perspective, all of a sudden. They're like, oh, shit. Like, okay. So really, though, it's so bringing that perspective is important, and also bringing it's hard for people to invest even $1 into themselves if they don't think they're worth it. And this is different. I don't trust myself isn't always I don't think I'm worth it. But I'm not worth it always typically leads to I don't trust myself. It's kind of like all rectangles are squares, but not all squares are rectangles. Remember that one from math class back in the day? It's one of my favorites. So you get to work with them in that moment to reconcile, to bridge the gap between like, hey, it's really not about the money. What's really going on? Well, you know what? It's really that I don't trust myself. Okay. So like, how long do you want to continue to not trust yourself? And with me on your team, I can tell you that I believe in you enough that I'm not going to let you fail. This is a conversation that I have with people on a regular basis, because sometimes we need to borrow someone else's confidence. It's like, you know, I tell the story all the time about, we used to live in Florida back in the day, and there was this public pool that we went to for the very first time, and my dad gets in the pool and I'm standing on the edge and he wants me to jump into the pool into his arms, right? And I was scared, and I'm standing on the edge of the pool and he's standing there and he's like, okay, jump. And I started to jump, and then I would stop. And then at one point he just kind of like lowered his energy, and he just sunk into this vibe of like total trust and really just love. And he looked up at me and he said, son, I got you. Just jump. And I was still scared, but I borrowed. His confidence was so strong that it absorbed into me. And I could borrow that confidence just for a moment, just long enough to jump. And sure enough, I jumped and he caught me. And so that completed the trust loop in that moment. And then you couldn't get me out of the pool for the rest of the day. Like, I was just jumping in the pool like crazy after that. And so it's in that moment where they need to borrow some of your confidence. They need to borrow some of your certainty in that moment to help them jump. Does that make sense? They need you to help them jump. Because left to their own devices, they just won't do it. Like a little kid who's never jumped into the pool before, to just jump in by themselves with no parent in the pool, like, that never happens. There's like a couple super ballsy kids that jump in by themselves every now and then, but for the most part, it just doesn't happen. And so it's about being a team with them. It's about standing up for them in that moment and saying, hey, like meeting the objection, like poking a big hole through the objection and saying, listen, this is what it's really costing you to be where you are. So to say that I can't afford it really kind of doesn't make any sense. And based on what you want of what it's going to be worth to you to pay this amount, sounds to me like the the best thing to do from here would be to just move forward and kind of get on with it. Don't you think? And that tone that I'm using there is kind of like, hey, like, we're both reasonable. Let's just be reasonable together. I'm on the same side as you. This is not a fight. Let's just be reasonable together. Like, doesn't it make sense that if you stay where you are, that nothing will change? Like, to hear the empathy coming out of my voice, like, we're just being reasonable here. Like, doesn't that make sense that if nothing changes, you'll just continue to be where you are? And based on what you told me that you want, doesn't it seem like the only way to get there is kind of by making this decision and changing everything? So it's really this like very connected moment where they can trust you and ultimately trust themselves to make that leap. And makes all the difference. What's another classic? Not right now. Not right now. I hear that one sometimes. That you don't like. I need to think about it, and I don't have the money. Those are the two biggest ones. But not right now. Like, oh, I've got a lot going on right now, so I can't do it right now. But maybe like follow up with me 3 months from now, 6 months from now, and we'll talk about it. The absolute best time to do anything big and bold to change your life is always right now. And again, if you have a habit of getting to the point of making a big, bold decision to make your life better and then saying, not right now, what do you think you're going to do when it comes 3 months, 6 months from now, when you said, hey, follow up with me in 3 months? If you have a habit of like filling all your time so that you can't make big decisions, do you think that somehow miraculously you'll have time in 3 months? Even if you can't see how that time is going to be filled in 3 months, if you're like, yeah, the calendar's looking pretty open in 3 months, let's talk then. From now till then, trust me, you will fill the time, because that's how people like that operate. So that doesn't fly. If someone says to me, yeah, I got a bunch going on right now, but it sounds really great, but right now it's just not the time to do it. I'm like, huh. When you tell me this, when is the best time to start enjoying? And then I list the things again that they said. More time, more money, more expansion, more freedom. You tell me, John, when is the best time for you to start enjoying those things? Mm-hmm. Right? And just let them feed that back to you, because that's the come to Jesus moment. They're like, you're right. You're right. And you show them the folly in their ways. It's not about making them wrong, but it's about being a truth mirror for them, to really show them the effects of their thinking, because we think that saying, let me think about it, doesn't cost us that much to throw that out there. We think that doesn't have much of a ramification, but it really, really, really does. It really, really does. And so we're just helping them to see that. We're saying, hey man, when you leave and get back into your car, you're not going back to the ranch is all fine and dandy. The ranch is burning down. And like, here's like the picture that you sent me of the ranch burning down. Like, remember that? Blow it up for you, right? Like, that's all we're helping them to do, is really see the truth in that moment, to sober them up to the truth. Remember, I talked about the 50s dad that gets hurt and he's like, I'm fine. I don't need to go to the doctor. And then they finally go to the doctor and the doctor's like, oh, so it's right in here. And they go, yeah, well, my wife said that. I think it's fine. And the doctor goes, oh, really? And the guy goes, oh, that's the sobering moment where you sober up to the reality of the pain. That's the sobering moment when someone sobers you up to the fact that thinking like that, delaying your expansion, is a really bad idea. Like a really bad idea. And so that's where they get to have that moment of liberation of like, yeah, man, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do this. I want to do this for myself. And they trust you and they trust themselves and they move forward. Now, the final one is a little different, because sometimes people say, I need to talk to my wife, or I need to talk to my husband, or I need to talk to somebody. It's a little tricky only because you want to be respectful, right? Especially people that are in relationships. married, like typically they share finances, they share decisions like that. So you don't want to just like steamroll that and be like, no, your wife will think it's awesome. Just do it. Like, obviously you don't want to be that guy. However, you don't want to let them off the hook. So there is a balance, okay? There is a balance. So here's what I say that for me has worked fairly well. Here's the thing. Typically in relationships, this isn't a blanket statement, but typically in relationships, there is the one person who makes decisions and the one person who kind of goes along with the decisions. Do you guys know what I mean? And that's not a good or a bad thing. It just kind of is what it is. But especially with financial decisions, what tends to happen is, let's just say the wife makes all the decisions and the husband doesn't, and he just kind of goes along with the deal. Especially when it comes to a decision about himself, if he doesn't trust himself and if he doesn't feel worthy, then he'll defer the decision to her and be like, oh, I got to ask my wife about it, AKA, I don't trust myself, I'm scared, I need your help. But obviously they're not going to say that, so they're going to defer it to their wife. They'll say, oh, it sounds great, your opportunity sounds awesome, I'm really into it, I just got to talk to my wife about it, which is code for, this sounds really good, but I want to give myself one last chance to play small so that I can get out of this, is what they're really saying. And they're saying, please help me because I don't want to get out of this. So you being the benevolent leader that you are, you hold them. Not literally, but like you hold that space for them. And you say, I hear what you're saying. And let me say this. I absolutely think that you should talk to your wife, to your husband, to your partner, to your whoever. Like you believe in that. That's a good thing. Like I don't want to get in the way of the way that you guys do stuff. But if that's going to be you continuing to play small, then I'm not going to stand for it. But of course you can't say that. So here's what I say instead. I say, I absolutely think that you should talk to your wife, John. And, write that word down in like big letters. And. That's a powerful word because it's a transition word. And it's also, it's better than the word but. Because when we say the word but, it basically means like everything that we just said is irrelevant. Like it negates everything that you just said. It'd be like, Shannon, I really enjoyed your musical performance, but, and as soon as you hear that, we just kind of go, oh, like, I guess they didn't really like it. But when we say and, it's just a transition. So I say, John, you absolutely should talk to your wife. I think that's a great idea. And this decision is for you, which means you get to make the decision. Now, if they are the person in the relationship who typically doesn't make the decision, then this is potentially one of the most powerful moments in their life. Because what they most likely have a habit of doing is giving up their power. They give up their power to the wife, to the husband. Oh, I don't make the decisions. I just give up the power. And whatever happens, it's not my fault. That's just up to them. So, like, and they get to live in that borderline, like victim, not accountable world. And that's like sad, right? So I say to them, motherfucker, I say, look, John, this is about you. And this is about you making the decision for yourself. So if this sounds good to you, this is just me and you being reasonable. If it sounds good to you, then my suggestion to you is to say yes to it. And then talk to your wife about it. And, there's that word again, and if you guys talk about it and you decide together that it's not a good idea after you've made the decision, then just let me know and we'll cancel the deal. No problem. No problem. Does that sound fair enough? Again, I'm just being reasonable. And so that changes everything because you are empowering them to make a decision by themselves for themselves. I'll tell you guys a funny story. I had a client a couple years ago who was a woman who gave her power up in the relationship. Anytime it came to make a decision, she would just give up the power. And then she gets on the phone with me. And we get to that moment and she goes, well, I got to talk to my husband about it. And I was like, oh, really? I hear what you're saying. And let me say this, motherfucker. I said, I absolutely think you should talk to your husband. And this decision is for you. You're going to be the one who has to put in the work. You're going to be the one who reaps the reward. This is your decision. So, if this sounds good to you, then my suggestion is to say yes to it. And then you can talk to your husband about it. And if you guys together decide it's not a good fit for whatever reason, just let me know and we'll cancel it. No problem. Does that sound fair? And she was like excited at the idea that she could make a decision for herself for once. Especially in my world, like making a decision to work with me really means like I'm choosing to embrace the biggest version of myself, which is like, yeah, it's a big decision. So she was like fucking empowered by this. She was scared, but she was empowered. And she goes, you know what? You're right. Let's do this. And I was like, yeah. And then the husband was like, he wanted to kill me because she shows up and she's like, so, like she was all in her power. She was like, I made a decision today and here's what the deal is. And he was like, what is this? But the funny thing was he was like, his knee-jerk reaction was that he was angry because he's so used to being in that position. But almost in the same moment, he was like turned on. He was like, ooh, like who's this sexy woman who's like coming in here telling me what's what? Like you can have whatever you want. Like, honey, it's just like, he was so pumped. So at first he wanted to kill me. And then like she made the investment back within like a week and a half or something. And he was like, Shannon, you are the man. Like you are awesome. Because she kept that empowerment. Like it wasn't like she just made the decision and then she went back to being like giving up the power. No. She made the decision and that was her new standard, right? So he got to experience this new version of his wife indefinitely. So he was like, bro, like, so the deal is when people work with me, they come to Santa Barbara. He was like, I'm coming to Santa Barbara with her, even though we're not working together, just so that I can shake your hand. And I was like, okay. And so he did. It was like the coolest thing ever. So does that make sense? Like you have to, it's a little bit of a balance. You can't just make them make the decision, but you can't just be like, oh, that's cool. You guys go talk about it and then like, let me know how it goes. Because what happens is, because the significant other usually isn't on the call, this is what happens. The husband goes to the wife and the husband's like, okay, honey. So because they haven't made a decision yet, they're a little shaky right from the beginning. So they're like, well, honey, so, you know, I talked to a coach today and we talked about a program and it's $10,000. Can I do it? And they're almost expecting them to say no. Because remember, like if they say no, then that validates their smallness. And then they get to go back to me and go, oh, well, you know, they said no, it's not me. Like, sorry, like I don't have anything to do with it. How convenient. I could just get to continue to be small. So you have to meet them right in the middle. You have to respect the relationship because you never know what level of relationship people have. So it's better to just be respectful and say, yeah, absolutely, go talk to them and make the decision first. Because 99% of the time, when you say, hey, that's cool, just go talk to them and, you know, let me know how it goes. 99% of the time they come back and say, oh, they said no, so I guess we can't do it. 95% of the time, when you have them make the decision first and then talk to them, it comes back as a yes. How cool is that? And remember, this is all about let's take as many people who are yeses, and even if they object, allow them to be yeses at the end of the day, because that's how it should be. Like, again, the worst thing in the world is two people who are yeses that somehow don't become a yes. So this allows you to create that yes in that scenario that sometimes can be a little bit sticky. And it's awesome. So those are the big ones. And I think if you guys practice those and you get really good at them, you're going to see your conversions go way up, and you'll be able to help more people and make more money, and we'll all have more fun. Is that helpful for you guys? Is that good? What about false yeses? Deanna, tell me about false yeses. I'm not quite sure what that means.
Like when someone is all in, all excited, yes, I'm in, and you send them the payment information and you set a start date and they disappear. How do you follow up with them? Obviously, something was in the gap for me as a benevolent leader, but
yeah,
it has happened.
Sure. In my experience, that tends to be pretty few and far between.
Yes, but it has happened. Like, or sometimes it's in the past before I was learning like powerful enrollment. It was like in follow-up, more like in follow-up stuff. Like, let me set up the next time to talk to you, which again, maybe is part of because I wasn't leading them in the first conversation. So maybe that's more what it is as a result. Because I don't think it's happened as a like, I've sent payment information. Only like once has that happened.
Yeah. I'm telling you guys, so much of why people will say yes and then actually follow through is because of the relationship between them and you in the moment. And that's why when they object, to have a really heartfelt, connected, but strong conversation is what allows them to transition to making that payment and actually getting on board so rapidly, because they have no fear, there's no objection, they feel totally resolved and ready to move forward. So yeah, I would say a lot of the time for the people who are a yes and then kind of bail out, it's because that initial conversation probably wasn't strong enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I asked earlier in the chat too, people who have serious financial issues, like I get it. I've been someone who hasn't had a lot of money when I was in grad school and I wasn't making a ton of money. I've always been resourceful. I've always figured out a way to pay for coaching, and it's gotten me where I am. When people aren't resourceful and they're literally looking at me going, I have no idea how to create this, do you help them, or do you just say that's part of the entry to coaching with me?
Yes. You mean as far as do I help them? How do you mean?
Help them create the resourcefulness, help them maybe have another session with them.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Okay.
I don't know if I'd have another session with them, but I'd certainly stay on the session with them.
Okay.
Because, and I want you guys to either write this down or at least remember it, which is every single person deserves an opportunity to see how powerful they are. Every single person deserves that opportunity. So sometimes the people who truly can't afford it are the people who get the most out of figuring out how to afford it. Because it's not about affording it, it's about who they become in the process of figuring it out. Mm-hmm. Because most people, when they're in that I can't afford it and they really can't, there's a little bit of victimness in there. Like, no, I'm a victim of my circumstances, man. Sorry. I wish I could, but I just can't. This is just where I am. It's like, yes, that is just where you are. And that isn't where you have to be. Like, you can be a version of yourself that is bigger than that. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about how you can be more resourceful, how you can be bigger. Because just because this is where you are, that's just a reflection of who you've been. That has nothing to do with what's happening right now. Right now is the start potentially of something totally new. So I will always, and that's just my, whenever I see anyone, I see them for who I think they really, really, really are, not for what they're presenting to me at face value. So even some of the most successful people that I've met, I see them and I'm like, hey, what you've done so far is pretty good. And I know that you could do even better than that. And then the people that I've met that are not successful at all, I look at them and I see the same thing. I say, hey man, this, where you are right now is not really who you are. You could be way up here. It's just you're acting like you're small. I believe everyone's a 10. They just act like different numbers. Everyone's a 10. They just act like different numbers. And so, yeah, I always give people the opportunity to expand if they're willing to engage that. So that's the caveat. That's maybe what's helpful, because sometimes people are so entrenched into that kind of victim-y, I'm not enough, I don't have the money, that they're not even willing to get above it. They're not even willing to figure out how they could experience anything else. And the amount of energy that it would take to figure it out, they're just not willing to go there. So those people, like, I can't help those people. I mean, you can't want it more than they do. I'd write that down. You can't want it more than they do. And so if they want it really bad, then I'll help them figure out how to make it possible. But if not, if they're not willing to play the game, then there's not much I can do. So hopefully that's helpful. Cool. Any other questions, guys? No? Pretty straightforward? Cool. Great. I realize I kind of get going and then sometimes I don't pay attention to the chat box. So if you guys do write questions in the chat box that I miss somehow, just unmute yourself or just put your hand up and I'll address it. Do we feel clear about what we talked about here today? Yeah, cool. Do you see how this will help you guys moving forward? Yeah, awesome. So no questions from you guys? You're all pretty clear about what to do from here? Chelsea's kind of like, you're eating, okay.
I can see how the part where you asked us earlier about the decision making factors into this objection. So I'm really interested to see what more you have to say about decision making so that we can impart that to them in their decision making.
Sure, certainly. Maybe next week we'll jam on that.
Awesome.
But certainly I think that to be a leader is kind of like, in my opinion, to be a leader, at least in some way, is to also embody the qualities that you want other people to embody. So it's kind of like, hey guys, I want you to go into the darkness. Will you please believe I've gone into the darkness already? I wouldn't ask you to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And so there is, in my opinion, because really we're building trust in that moment, especially when they object. And if they don't trust themselves, then you can please believe that they don't trust you. But if you have this just air of you that's strong and yet benevolent and empathetic, then you can melt that distrust they have in themselves and they can connect to you, they can trust you, they can trust themselves, and they can make a decision. So it's powerful for you to be able to have this ability to make rapid decisions and to be very decisive in your own life. Because to be indecisive and then get on a call with people and be like, yeah, make a decision, it's kind of like it would be hard for you to kind of energetically hold that space when that's not something that you do. That'd be out of integrity for you. And so decisive decision making, I think it's just a valuable tool anyway. But as far as embodiment and imparting that onto other people when they're making decisions, it just creates much more trust and confidence in that conversation. So we'll talk about it. Cool. Awesome, guys. That's a good insight there, Deanna. Great. Well, good work today, guys. If you do come to any other questions about this, you can just post them in the group. And otherwise, I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. And we're in the home stretch, guys. This is it. This is the last month. So I expect all of you to do your absolute best this month, whatever that looks like for you. I want you to play full out. And of course, I want you to have fun. It's the holidays. Like, I don't want you to just like completely not be into that. I want you to have fun. I want you to connect with people. It's important. And I also want you to get what you want out of this group, out of the end of the year. So let's all agree to do that with each other and for each other. Cool. Cool. Awesome, guys. Great. Good to see you. Bye-bye.